안녕하십니까.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the International Symposium in commemoration of KWDI's 40th anniversary. Welcome. I am Eunji Kim, Director of Division for Planning and Coordination of KWDI, today's moderator. We provide Korean, English, simultaneous interpretation during the symposium. Please turn on the receiver. It's placed on your table. You can use the interpretation. And also today's symposium is being recorded and you can watch the whole entire symposium on YouTube later. The International Symposium is being held in commemoration of KWDI's 40th anniversary, and it's being held under the theme The Changing Society and the Future of Gender Equality Policy. We have two keynote speeches and discussion. First of all, let me introduce the distinguished guests to you. Please welcome them with a big round of applause when I name them. We have two ambassadors here. Ambassador Catherine Ripper of Australia. Ambassador Maria Teresa Dijon Deve of the Philippines. Commemorating the 40th anniversary, we have former directors of the Institute here with us. Director Kim Jung-ja, the 5th director of the Institute. Thank you for coming. 12th Director, Kim Tae-hyun. And also Head of National Research Council for Economic Humanities and Social Sciences and affiliated organizations are here with us. Mr. Hong Il-pyo, Secretary General of the Council. Director Mi-ok Moon of Science and Technology Policy Institute. Thank you for coming. Korea Transport Institute's Director, Oh Jae-hak. Director of Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs, Lee Tae-soo. Director of Institute of Public Administration. Thank you for coming. Institute of Public Administration, Choi Sang-han, and Kim Jae-jin of Tax Policy Institute. Director Ha Tae-un of Institute of Criminology. Director Park Sang-hee of Child Care Policy Institute. Thank you for coming. Also, we have many distinguished guests here with us from Women's Policy Institute. Head of UN Women Gender Equality Center, Lee Jung-sim. President of Korean Institute for Gender Equality Promotion and Education, Jang Myung-sun. Head of Daegu Metropolitan City Public Agency for Social Service, Chung Sun-chun. Head of Gwangju Women Foundation, Kim Kyung-rae. Thank you for coming. Let me introduce our keynote speakers and discussants later. And we also have many precious guests here with us. Due to time constraints, we cannot introduce them one by one. Please understand that. Let me express my gratitude to all of you who are here with us today. Now, let us begin the opening ceremony of the International Symposium. First of all, let us invite President of KWDI, Moon Yu-kyung, for her opening remarks.
Good morning. I am Moon Yu-kyung, President of the KWDI. I'd like to thank you all for taking time to join us for this international symposium celebrating the 40th anniversary of the KWDI. I would also like to express my sincere gratitude to Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, Minister of Gender Equality and Family Kim Hyun-suk, Chairperson of the Gender Equality and Family Committee at the National Assembly, Kwon In-suk, and Vice Chief of the Presidential Committee on Aging Society, Kim Young-min, and Ambassador of Australia to the ROK, Catherine Raper, and National Policy Committee member Yoon Ju-kyung, and Chairperson of the NRC, Jung Hae-go, for their congratulatory remarks that will be coming soon. And I would also like to thank those who sent us the congratulatory videos. And Maria Teresa Dijon de Vega, the Philippine ambassador to Korea, and Australian ambassador to Korea, Catherine Raper, and also the Secretary General Hong Il-pyo, and all the heads and the directors of the relevant agencies, and everyone who are making efforts to pursue women's policies around the country. Thank you for coming. It's been a long time since we met so many people face to face at an event, and now that we are celebrating the 40th anniversary together with you, this is even more exciting and rewarding. The Korean Women's Development Institute was established in 1983, and since then, it has played a pivotal role in promoting gender equality policies over the past 40 years. And the 40 years of achievements cannot be summarized in one word. But I think I will be able to talk about those achievements in 3 different categories largely. And the first biggest achievement, I would say, is the following. Prior to the opening of the Institute, women's issues or gender discrimination were considered a private matter. But since the opening of the Institute, the KWDI has worked tirelessly to create a legal system for those issues to be addressed in a larger policy framework. So wide-ranging topics were handled by the Institute, including diverse forms of families, caregiving, and others. So we're making continuous effort to conduct research and develop policies. And the second achievement is leveraging gender mainstreaming policy to push gender equality policies to become a main agenda. The Institute made sure that all ministries and local governments consider gender sensitivity when driving policy efforts by helping to legislate new laws and revise existing ones. And as a result, when I have a meeting at the other ministries, we actually use the term gender sensitivity and gender responsiveness so often, thanks to the efforts of the KWDI. And the third achievement would be the following. The Institute is collecting and managing large-scale data such as longitudinal survey of women and families and gender statistics. And by doing so, it is making sure that the necessary data is given to the researchers and the general public can access such data to improve their understanding. And once the gender equality knowledge platform that we are building right now comes to life, we will be able to take another leap forward as a leading data-driven think tank. So once again, I would like to thank the National Assembly, ministries, women's organizations, experts, and everyone for always supporting our work. The theme of today's International Symposium is the changing society and the future of gender equality policy. The ever-changing environment, including the recent pandemic, digital transformation, and climate change, calls for new actions in gender equality policy. Therefore, I hope this symposium will be a great opportunity for us to share the trends and strategies observed in the international community and explore the challenges and solutions together. Also, I hope to be able to take stock of what the KWDI has achieved over the past 40 years. I would like to thank Ms. Anna Karine Yatfors, Director of Strategy Planning, Resources, and Effectiveness Division at UN Women, and Ms. Shin Hye-soo, Chairwoman of the BOD of the Kokkun, for their keynote presentations. The KWDI will continue to expand the horizons of women's policy research and lead the way, going beyond Korea to become a hub for international discussions on gender equality policy. We will continue to develop and nurture our values and capabilities as a leading research institute in a sustainable manner. And your continued support and interest will be our engine. Last but not least, I would like to thank the roundtable panelists, President of the Korean Association of Women's Studies, Kang Isu, Head of the Women's Policy Division at the MOGAF, Kim Jong-mi, Chairperson of the National Women's Policy Network, Oh Kyung-eun, Director of the Korea Council of Women's Organizations, Gu Myung-suk, Co-representative of the Korea Women's Associations United, Kim Min-moon-jung, and Managing Director at GM Korea, Yoon Myung-ok, for joining us. I wish you a very fruitful session today. Thank you.
감사합니다.
Thank you. Now we have received many congratulatory messages from precious people. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo has sent his congratulatory message. Please refer to the booklet for it. And now, Minister of Gender Equality and Family, Hyun-soo Kim, and Chairperson of the Gender Equality and Family Committee, In-soo Kwan, have shared their congratulations. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Minister of Gender Equality and Family, Hyun-soo Kim. Congratulations on the 40th anniversary of Korean Women's Development Institute. Let me express my sincere gratitude to those at the Institute who have worked tirelessly for gender equality for over 40 years. It was the commitment and efforts made by President Yoo Kyung-moon and those at the Institute that helped KWDI establish itself as a leading think tank for gender equality policies of Korea. This symposium held in commemoration of the Institute's 40th anniversary is all the more meaningful and timely in that sense, as it's where we share gender equality policies and strategies of Korea and from around the world. Our gender equality policies have brought about real achievements in many parts of the society, improving women's status and protecting their rights. However, things are changing rapidly, and we are faced with new challenges now. Not only efforts by the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family or the KWDI, but also government-wide efforts with support from all the members of the society are needed to build gender equality policies. We still have a long way to go when it comes to addressing gender equality issues, as we need to further expand jobs for women, improve gender equality at workplaces, promote work-life balance, protect from violence, and all these other crimes. I hope today's forum will be a good opportunity to come up with policy directions. Advances in gender equality policies in Korea have always come together with research achievements of KWDI. Ministry of Gender Equality and Family also has based its gender equality policies on the Institute's research achievements to improve happiness and well-being of our people. Last year, we completed the legislation of Stalking Victims Protection Act to establish protection system for victims and thoroughly revised the Women's Economic Activities Act to boost female employment. In addition, as an important part in improving gender equality, we are continuing our efforts to make a society where men and women work together and provide care together. Measures were put in place to advance childcare services to mitigate the burden of caregiving, which is one of primary causes of women's career interruption. We're also expanding certification of family-friendly companies operating exemplary work-life balance system. Since 2022, companies that have maintained the certification for a long time have been designated as best companies, encouraging them to lead these corporate culture that is family-friendly. Recently, more diverse projects are being carried out, including the establishment of the third basic plan for gender equality policies so that our people can feel the actual effects of such policies in their lives in areas close to them, such as women's economic activities and caregiving and protection from violence. Going forward, the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family will continue to support the value of gender equality so that members of our society can feel the actual changes. I hope Korean Women's Development Institute will continue to provide support for realizing a society that is equal to all of us. Once again, congratulations on the 40th anniversary and also on the very opening of this symposium. I wish all of you tremendous success in everything you do. Thank you.
Hello, I am Kwon In-suk, the member of the National Assembly. I extend my heartfelt congratulations on the 40th anniversary of the KWDI. I'm well aware that President Moon Yoo-kyung and the Institute's members are working tirelessly to promote gender equality research and policy development in Korea. Thank you for your hard work. Despite challenging environment to police pursue policymaking, I will work even harder to achieve gender equality in Korea as the chairperson of the Gender Equality and Family Committee in partnership with the KWDI. Congratulations once again on the anniversary. I wish you all the best. Thank you. Next, we have in fact received the congratulatory remarks from the Vice Chief of the Presidential Committee on Aging Society and Population Policy. Please refer to the booklet. Next, let me invite Australian Ambassador Catherine Raper to the stage for the congratulatory remark.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to join so many of you here today in person to celebrate 40 years of the Korean Women's Development Institute. The Australian Embassy has had a long relationship with the KWDI, spanning many of those 40 years. And in my time in Seoul, I've seen firsthand the importance of the Institute's work. Australia, like the Republic of Korea, is resolute in our commitment to achieving gender equality. And while both countries are making good progress, we still have a way to go. The World Economic Forum reports that last year, the global gender gap receded to 2016 levels, and it's now estimated that it will take 132 years to close the gender gap and reach full parity. Australia's strategies for closing this gap and achieving gender equality are centred around evidence-based policymaking and based on good data. The evidence shows that removing the barriers to female participation in our workforce is essential to economic success. Taking this approach also helps deliver outcomes that improve equality for everyone and creates resilient and secure societies. In Australia, as in the Republic of Korea, inclusive economic growth and progress on gender equality issues would not be possible without the tireless work of civil society organisations like the KWDI. And I'm sure the work of the KWDI will continue to be important, just as important for the next 40 years, as it has been so far, as we continue on the important journey of achieving gender equality. Thank you very much. 감사합니다.
감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Member of the National Policy Committee at the Parliament, Chu Young has shared her remarks. Good afternoon. I'm Yoon Ju-kyung. I would like to congratulate you on the 40th anniversary. And the Institute has been doing very great to promote gender equality. And with their proposals of policies, it has been the center of all these policy proposals and been a very great think tank in achieving a lot. I hope that it can play this key role going forward as well. Thank you. Thank you for your remarks. Now, Chairperson of the National Research Council for Economics, Haegu Chung, will share his remarks, but actually Mr. Hong Yu-pyo will be reading the message on behalf.
Hello, I am Secretary General of the NRC, Hong Il-pyo. The Chairman Jung Hae-gu was not able to come, but he wished he could come so much. But unfortunately, because of the schedule conflict, I am reading his message on behalf of him. So apologies for that before I start. Hello everyone, I am Jung Hae-gu, Chairman of the NRC. In commemoration of the 40th anniversary of the KWDI, we're holding this international symposium today. I would like to extend my sincere congratulations on the 40th anniversary and the symposium. First of all, I would like to thank President Moon Yu-kyung and the staff members of the KWDI for their hard work in putting together this symposium. I would like to also thank Australian Ambassador to the ROK, Catherine Raper, for her congratulatory remarks, and Director Anna Karin Yapfors of UN Women, and Chairwoman Shin Hye-soo of the Kokun for their keynote presentations. Thank you for your taking such roles. Since the establishment in 1983, the Korean Women's Development Institute has worked on numerous women's agenda, developing laws and policies for women's empowerment in the 80s, providing policy support to help women to join the workforce in the 90s, and since 2000s and onwards, gender mainstreaming in overall policymaking and promoting women's employment and work-family balance, spreading family-friendly culture, ensuring women's safety and preventing gender-based violence, raising awareness of gender equality. As a result, the KWDI has become one of Korea's leading research organizations specializing in women's policy. All of these achievements are the result of the dedication and hard work of the current and former members of the Institute. So I want to take this opportunity to express my gratitude towards them. Even with these remarkable achievements, there are still many issues at hand. We need to fairly divide household duties, including childcare, close the gender gap in employment and wages, stop gender-based violence and conflicts, and stop political abuse of such conflicts, break glass ceilings in the workplace and in the politics, and the list continues. Moreover, we have experienced a pandemic for the past 3 years and are faced with challenges and changes of this transformative period, including climate crisis and digital transformation. In this ever-changing environment, it is not clear how women's status and gender equality issues will develop in the future. Against this backdrop, I hope that today's event themed The Changing Society and the Future of Gender Equality Policy will serve as a venue for in-depth discussions on these issues. And I hope that the discussions we have today will contribute to the future work of the KWDI and national policy-making efforts. Once again, congratulations on the 40th anniversary of the KWDI, and I hope that today's symposium will be a stepping stone for a big leap forward into the next 40 years. The NRC will actively support the KWDI so its research efforts can continue to be systematic and impactful. I wish the best success of the KWDI going forward. Thank you. Chairperson of the NRC, Jung Hae-gu. Thank you.
Now, we would like to, actually we have these congratulatory messages from
안녕하십니까. 저는 다니엘 볼벤 조한스베든 대사입니다. 한국 여성 정책 연구원의 개원사 10주년을 진심으로 축하드립니다. It is my great honor to deliver this congratulatory message representing Sweden, a long-standing friend of Korea Women's Development Institute. For the past 4 decades, you have been an unwavering force in promoting gender equality and women's empowerment in Korea. I strongly believe your research, advocacy, and educational programs have made significant contributions to the growth and development of women's rights in Korea. Sweden remains committed to promoting gender equality, women's rights, and an inclusive society. And we look forward to further cooperation with KWDI in the years to come as we work together to create a more just and equal society. I wish you continued prosperity as you advance women's rights and gender equality in Korea and beyond.
Congratulations to the Korea Women's Development Institute for being a beacon of gender equality and women's empowerment for the last 40 years. The United States is committed to ensuring all people are treated fairly and equitably, and we look forward to partnering with you to create more inclusive societies for the future of our two countries and the world. Congratulations again.
I would like to extend my warmest and sincere congratulations to the Korean Women's Development Institute on its 40th anniversary. Database gender research is important for policy development and for meaningful conversations on gender equality and diversity. And for 40 years, the KWDI has made a difference. Norway is convinced that gender equality is not only the right thing to do, but the best investment for the future. Equal opportunities are good for the economy and increase values for the whole society. I am hopeful that contact with the Norwegian Research Council will lead to research collaboration and that Norway can become part of the already extensive list of your international partners. I wish the President of the KWDI and all the researchers and staff every success in the years to come. 감사합니다.
Dear friends, my name is Tamara Mawhinney, Canada's acting ambassador to the Republic of Korea. And I'm very honored to extend my heartfelt congratulations to the Korean Women's Development Institute on the occasion of your 40th anniversary. And over the past 4 decades, KWDI has played a vital role in promoting gender equality and contributing to the development of policies and laws that support women's rights and empowerment in Korea. And in Canada, we believe that promoting women's empowerment and gender equality is not only a moral imperative, it's essential for building a peaceful, prosperous, and inclusive society. Gender equality is not only the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. The work of the KWDI closely aligns with our foreign policy values and goals, and we are proud to support your efforts. I look forward to seeing the Institute's continued success in the years to come. Congratulations once again on this momentous occasion. 감사합니다.
안녕하세요. 유엔 여성기구 성평등센터 이정심 소장입니다.
Hello, I am Lee Jung-shim of the UN Women Gender Equality Center. Congratulations on the 40th anniversary of the KWDI. The KWDI has worked on evidence-based research to change the gender inequality situations in Korea. Many different gender-related development aids were made as well to support the partnership between Korea and the APEC countries. Given such achievements of the KWDI is in fact becoming a role model and a best practice that is actually looked after by all the other agencies around the world. And I hope to have our partnership to strengthen even more.
Hello, annyeonghaseyo. I am Andrew Below, Interim Chief of the Seoul Representational Office of the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA. First of all, I would like to express my sincere congratulations for the 40th anniversary of the Korea Women's Development Institute, which opened in 1983 and has been a central contributor and advocate for the development of gender equality policies in the Republic of Korea. I wish to give thanks to KWDI's executive team and staff members for their persistence, dedication, and passion. In particular, I wish to thank Dr. Moon Yoo-kyung, the president of KWDI, for her leadership. UNFPA has enjoyed a strong partnership with KWDI over many years. We look forward to continuing our exchanges and cooperation as we continue to pursue a shared agenda focused on the issues of gender-based violence prevention, low fertility, women's health, and sexual and reproductive rights, and through the annual launch of the State of the World Population Report. We look forward to continuing to partner with the Korea Women's Development Institute for many years to come. Thank you, 감사합니다, and congratulations once again.
감사합니다.
Thank you. Now we will be asking the keynote presentation from the keynote speakers. We have invited 2 keynote presenters under the theme The Changing Society and the Future of Gender Equality Policy. The first speaker is Director Anna Karin Jafors at UN Women. She has served for over 20 years in international organizations like UNICEF, UN Women, and is the current Director of Strategy, Planning, Resources, and Effectiveness Division. She will present on the advancing gender equality in times of crisis and change. Please give her a big round of applause.
Thank you. My name is Anna Karin Jafors, and I'm the Director of Strategy, Planning, Resources, and Effectiveness Division at UN Women. And of course, I want to begin by sincerely thanking the President of the Korean Women's Development Institute, Dr. Yoo-kyung Moon, and her excellent team for inviting me and for this opportunity to celebrate with you as you commemorate your 40th anniversary symposium. It's my honor to be here and to have this chance to speak to you about the issue of gender equality, notably in times of crisis and change. So I will try in my 20 minutes to cover 3 topics very briefly. First, to provide a snapshot on the latest global data on where we are in advancing gender equality and the role this plays in driving progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. Second, I want to highlight some key strategies that have been proven to work to advance gender equality, especially in this context that we live in of crisis and change. And finally, I have some specific recommendations for the Republic of Korea to further contribute to global gender equality efforts. So to start off, I think there's no doubt that the world is facing unprecedented and compounding crises. Conflicts and humanitarian crisis, climate change, the continued effects of COVID-19, rising inequalities, etc., all of which are impacting progress on the SDGs. And there's also no doubt from the evidence that to address these interconnected challenges, we have to place gender equality at the heart of our efforts so that women and girls are able to fully enjoy their human rights. So I want to begin to see where are we and how far do we have to come. So when we look at the global evidence, the data tells us that 7 years left to reach the deadline of achieving the SDGs by 2030, we are off track when it comes to most of the indicators on SDG 5. In fact, 28% of the gender-related SDG indicators are either far or very far from the 2030 targets. For example, at the current rate of progress, it could take 286 years to close gaps in legal protections and remove discriminatory laws. None of us here can afford to wait that long. But in addition to the lack of progress or slow progress, another challenge is the lack of data. In fact, currently only 47% of the data that we need to monitor SDG 5 is available at this time. So UN Women, recognizing this need that measurements are really critical to step up our efforts, we are expanding our global program, flagship program on gender statistics called Women Count, now in more than 70 countries. So against this stark backdrop then, let's examine some of the strategies that we can employ to advance gender equality and get us back on track on the SDGs. This is all in line with our ambitious strategic plan, where we are working with our partners to accelerate progress on gender equality. There are many, but in my intervention, I want to highlight 5 key strategies that we are scaling up as part of our work to implement our strategic plan, with a particular focus on those that address issues of conflict and crisis. So the first strategy I want to highlight is ensuring that women's priorities really shape policy making and that our governance is gender responsive. We do see some progress where women's priorities are slowly but surely moving into the mainstream of national policy making. First, good news when it comes to women's political participation. As of January this year, the share of women in parliaments surpassed 1/4. It's now 26.5% globally. This is still not parity, but it is more than double of where we were in the year 2000. Here, I want to point out the importance of quotas and temporary special measures. We now have 93 countries, that's 48% of countries globally, that have introduced these quotas, and they make a difference. But of course, we have also seen progress globally, and we heard great examples today from Korea on ending discriminatory laws, including in areas of sexual and reproductive health and rights, women's land ownership, and marriage and citizenship, just to mention a few. Second, UN Women is working with our partners to make sure that COVID-19 recovery policies are gender responsive. We have had the benefit of support from the Korean government and developed a COVID-19 global gender response tracker together with UNDP that has been monitoring more than 3,000 different policies on COVID-19 and highlighting those that have embedded gender perspectives. Here in Asia, we are working with the Korean Ministry of Gender Equality and Family to ensure that socioeconomic responses to COVID-19 are gender responsive, doing that in India, Nepal, Cambodia, and Thailand. And we've also worked specifically with KWDI back in December to have a joint regional dialogue sharing good practices on gender responsive recovery and response to COVID-19. So I think this is a very positive example. But the third one I want to highlight is the expansion of gender responsive social protection systems. I cannot overstate the importance of this as a buffer towards economic and environmental shocks, and ensuring that women are able to have economic security even in times of crisis. This is very challenging, especially in a region like Asia Pacific, where the majority of women's labor is in informal and vulnerable employment, where public spending is still below the global average, and where fewer than half the population have access to any social protection benefits. We do see particularly that public investment in the care economy are critical for economic recovery. Having affordable quality care services is critical to bring women back into the labor force. In fact, women's participation in labor markets is now lower than what it was before COVID-19. And so we see the importance of that. In fact, over the past few years, COVID-19 propelled a number of countries into action by bringing that into the part of the response. This is very good, but we need to continue to prioritize these investments so that all women have access to gender responsive public services, social protection, and care systems. So the second area I want to highlight is addressing the disproportionate toll that conflicts and crisis place on women and girls, so that we're really harnessing women's leadership in building peace. I want to stress here that women and girls don't just bear the brunt of the impact of conflicts, but they are critical leaders and change agents in providing the solutions. For a long time, the peace tables were really the domain of men only, but this is beginning to change. We now have 32, this is as of 2021, 32% of peace agreements had gender provisions. It's not good enough, but it's a massive improvement from where we were just a few years ago. At the same time, when we look at the peace tables, women are still excluded. Between 2005 and 2020, 80% of peace negotiations did not include women. So we really need to bring in representation so that women's needs can be prioritized. Now, for UN Women, we work as part of our coordination mandate to bring gender equality into the work of all aspects of humanitarian action. In October last year, we were awarded full membership of the Interagency Standing Committee, the IASC, and this is really important for us to be able to support the inclusion of women's voices in humanitarian decision-making. One excellent example that I want to highlight as a good practice is the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. This fund was established in 2015 and has already provided more than 900 organizations, women's organizations, with support. And we do know that this is really essential. If we take just two examples in the world right now, in Ukraine, for example, women and their children represent more than 90% of the 8 million Ukrainians that have had to leave their country as a result of the war. And out of the more than 5 million people that have been displaced within Ukraine, women and girls make up around 2/3. So clearly hearing their voices in the solution is essential. Perhaps the starkest example is Afghanistan, where decades of progress have been reversed, and women and girls are now largely confined to their homes. They are excluded from schools and workplaces, which has devastating impacts, not just on their livelihoods, but also on their families. We do know there are cultural barriers that prevent women from engaging with men outside of their families, which means that when women workers are no longer allowed to provide services, this prevents women from accessing humanitarian aid, food, and life-saving services. The third example I want to highlight is the need to prevent violence against women and to ensure that all survivors have access to quality services and justice. We do know the very, very large numbers of women that experience violence in their lifetime. The recent data shows that more than 12% of women have experienced intimate partner violence in the last 12 months alone, with lifetime experience being much, much higher, of course. So we really need to consider this because especially where you have global climate and humanitarian crisis, these increase the risk of violence even more. We did see with COVID-19 awareness of this issue increase, what we have called the shadow pandemic of violence against women. And I think one very good example is from the Pacific that has amongst the highest rates of violence in the world. But during COVID-19, Fiji really stood out as a great providing comprehensive response to women who experience violence. We work closely with the government there and CSOs to adapt the support services that are available, strengthening hotlines, allowing crisis centers and shelters to remain open by considering them essential services that were exempt from movement restrictions, but also training healthcare workers to support survivors and strengthening referral pathways so that the justice system, for example, was able to continue to provide support and prioritize these cases. We know this is absolutely essential to make sure that women are able to access justice. So the fourth example I want to highlight is advancing women's economic empowerment and driving gender-responsive climate justice. We saw before COVID-19 that poverty was going down, but that is now being reversed as a result of the pandemic. In fact, if current trends continue, there will be more women and girls in sub-Saharan Africa living in poverty by 2030 than do today. And we see hunger is also growing. About 1 out of 3 women globally are now affected by either moderate or severe food insecurity, and the gender gap is growing. So yes, we know that women are the most affected by hunger and food insecurity, but they are also part of the solution. Around the world, women farmers and entrepreneurs are really driving innovation from large agribusiness to small-scale farms. And if women smallholder farmers had equal access to productive resources, farm yields could increase by as much as 30%, and up to 150 million people would no longer go hungry. So we are seeing, fortunately, growing understanding that climate action must be gender responsive. We fought hard with our allies to make sure there is now a gender action plan in the UN framework on the Convention of Climate Change. And just last year, the Commission on the Status of Women in the 66th session considered the issue of climate change and gender equality for the first time. So we really have to make sure that these normative commitments are implemented by dedicating the required financial resources and making sure that we integrate gender perspectives across all national level climate plans. But the issue of representation is also really critical to make sure that women are equally represented in climate action, including at the leadership level and in negotiations. This is key to make sure their needs are prioritized. And the final key strategy then that I want to highlight is on leveraging technology and innovation to close the digital divide. Just last month, the 67th session on the Commission on the Status of Women looked at technology and innovation. And it highlighted really both the challenges, but also the opportunities that social media and other aspects of technology provide. On one hand, it provides women with services, with support networks, with access to information, but it has also fostered, unfortunately, harm through disinformation and misogyny that's being spread online. The data is sobering, as you can see on the slide. Women are 18% less likely to own a smartphone. They are far less likely to use the internet. In fact, last year, there were 259 million more men than women online. This is very concrete, impacting on whether women will be able to access education, getting bank accounts, feeding your family, accessing employment. So this is a real challenge. But women are also underrepresented in the sector, even though girls are now outperforming boys in tertiary education. They represent only 28% of engineering graduates and just 22% of AI workers globally. So clearly, if women are not included amongst technology creators, decision makers, digital products will not reflect their needs and priorities. And of course, we also must look at the issue of misinformation and work with men and boys so that we have more responsible and ethical and non-violent behavior online, so that all online spaces can be free from violence and abuse. And finally, it's not just a matter of women in the tech sector having fewer positions, but they also face a pay gap of 21%, while nearly half have faced workplace harassment. So we have to look at the environment in the sector as well. So we have to fix the institutions that convey stereotypes. We have to make sure that technology is safe, that it is inclusive, that it is accessible. And this also looks making sure that we don't have any bias that is embedded within these technologies, so that women are also a key part in the design and development of technology. So, final slide here. This is some recommendations from Korea in particular. Korea is the 10th largest economy in the world and has a lot of opportunities to play an even bigger role as a leader in advancing gender equality. First, by mainstreaming gender in national policies and tracking investments. This can be done with gender-responsive budgeting, but also measuring progress around issues like social protection, political participation, violence against women, etc. Tracking progress is really critical for accountability. Second, there is room to ensure that a greater share of the Korean ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, focuses on gender equality. Korea has become an important donor of international assistance, but there is still room to increase the share of this aid that goes towards gender equality, where Korea is behind the OECD average. Right now, we have about a quarter of the Korean aid that targets gender equality. And so this is an opportunity to increase and really put the Republic of Korea as a leader in gender-responsive financing. Third, I think, is the issue of the culture, technology, innovation. We know that Korea is home to so many tech companies, but it's also a cultural powerhouse with movie stars, pop stars that have reaching millions of people around the world. And so they can be powerful in promoting positive social norms and really promoting women's and girls' rights, both online and in physical spaces. And this fits well with the focus on Korea on also addressing technology-enabled violence, for example. And finally, having active engagement in global and regional normative processes. I spent a long time in Asia Pacific, and I see the need for more diversity of voices defending gender equality, including from the Asia Pacific region, in all relevant fora, the CSW, G20, and so on, to really bring clear messaging on the need for gender equality as a cross-cutting issues in all humanitarian action and development work. And this can also provide an opportunity for Korea to really showcase its successes and lessons learned so it can benefit other countries. So with that, I will close. Of course, we do know that if we want to put us back on track to meet the SDGs, we have to put gender equality at the center of our investments, whether this is about addressing impacts of climate change, pandemics, crises, conflict. Where we do this, we must include women's full and meaningful participation, so that we're really harnessing their ideas, harnessing their knowledge and energy to design and implement the solutions that are needed to create a safer and more sustainable and equal future for all. So with that, I'm right at my time, and thank you very much, and looking forward to the questions and answers that follow. Thank you.
네, 안나 카린 야포스.
Thank you, Director Anna Karin Yafors, for your presentation. And you are right on time. So in the time of crisis and change, what kind of activity should be done for advancing gender equality was the topic of the presentation. Next, let me invite Shin Hye-soo, chairwoman of the BOD of the Kokun. She is a pioneer in human rights movement in Korea and former member of the UNCEDAW. Let's give her a big round of applause. And she is also a former member of the UNCESCR. She will present on the 40 years of gender equality policy in Korea, achievements and tasks. Please give her another big round of applause. Oh, I received a big round of applause already. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. I will do my best to finish within 20 minutes, but I'm not sure whether I can do it. But I will, once again, do my best. Gender equality policy are in fact divided into largely 6 areas in Korea. And Korean Yaforce actually made a really good point. Economic independence is really important. And the second really important aspect is the eradication of violence and having control over your own body through having the rights around sexual and reproductive rights. And health is something that is important. And also equal participation in politics and public decision making. That's also important. And eradicating these discriminatory gender roles and biases. That's important. And also enhancing the rights of vulnerable women groups is another very important aspect. And I don't think I will have to go through the in-depth content of all these 6 areas because they are very well known. In my view, the achievements and the challenges of the gender equality policy can be looked at in 3 different factors. The first factor, I would say, is the will to change the unequal reality. So that could be the will of the individual women. It could be the will of the women's organizations that are representing women. How strong the will is, that is a really important element that is at play. And the second element that is at play would be the gender equality policymakers, the government and the National Assembly and the women's organizations that are pushing such government bodies. That would be the second important element. And then there will be the third important element, which is the social environment that is surrounding the women. The political one, international influence, those will all fall into the third element category. And based on such influences, there could be changes that happen in the policy making related to women's issues, and the progress and the regression may be made based on such influences. So taking stock of the past 40 years, it has been a really big work. So I actually divided these 40 years into several segments up to 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, 2010s. So if you look at the time period before 1980s, the Korean society was experiencing a lot of issues. We had the military dictatorship, wars, poverty, and the U.S. military government and so forth. And in the 1980s, we were liberated from the military dictatorship, and then we were moving into the democratization. And against this grim background, the women's movement started to be born. Of course, there were women's movements that were there before this, but then this is in fact the exact time where the women's movements were beginning in full steam. And in the 1990s, we were able to see the growth of such women's movement. And if you look at the context, we were joining the UN, and we actually saw the wave of globalization coming into Korea. And we also saw active efforts made by women for self-help and legislative movements. And the achievements were made based on such efforts. And in the 2000s, we were able to see the institutionalization of such efforts, and we also saw the improvement in gender equality policies as well. But then if you look at 2010s and onwards, up to today, we have seen progress, we have seen improvements, of course, but we also have seen backlash, we also saw some regression, and we also saw the emergence of new problems coming from online environment and so forth. So we have to make new types of efforts again. So I talked about the 3 key elements that are deciding the gender equality policy earlier. And I would like to cover what kind of achievements have been made based on such three elements in Korea. So let me start from the period before the 1980s in Korea. So if you look at the government departments or agencies, we actually had a small department within the government related to women's issues. And we actually had a military coup in 1961. And in 1975, I actually was a graduate student back then, back in 1975, by the way. But anyways, in 1975, we actually started accepting the changes in the global world, and we actually had seen some democratization movements happening in Korea, and many women came together to make amendments of the family law starting around this period. So the women's movement, the oldest one in Korea is, the oldest organization in Korea is YWCA, which was established in 1922. And we also see some important names that are listed out here. We have seen the establishment of Women's Affairs Research Institute and the Legal Aid Center for Women in the War. And we also have seen the establishment of Korea Church Women United in 1967 and the Korean League of Women Voters in 1969, which were progressive organizations. So the maternity leave was given for 2 months back in 1953, but after the military coup, we actually saw the Act on Prevention of Prostitution and Mother and Child Health Act coming into being afterwards, and these were the only kind of policies that we saw related to gender equality back then. If you move on to 1980s, as you can see, we have seen a lot of other women's organizations coming into life. These are actually the driving forces of change that can make actual changes in the world. And in 83, Korea Women's Development Institute was launched, and we actually talked to the household and house care women, asking whether they have been impacted by the domestic violence recently, and we actually got the response that many of them have experienced such domestic violence, and we actually ran an op-ed there on the newspaper so that can be actually known to the public. And we have also seen the other organizations coming into life as well. And if you look at the government departments, we actually saw the department related to gender equality that is in the government back then, but during the Chun Doo-hwan president period, we actually saw the Ministry of Political Affairs having 14 focal points on women coming into being. So, in fact, having that done is actually one of the achievements made by the government, even though there were a lot of misdeeds that were carried out by this government. And women-related issues were dealt with in such organizations. And if you look at the society, in 1984, we actually had the ratification of CEDAW, CEDAW, and that is continuing until today. So the gender equality policies that you look at, or the Fair Employment Act, are in fact the ones that were pursued by the Korea Women's Link back in the days. And we also have made some ban on sex identification of the fetus, led by the women's organization's efforts to reduce abortion of the female babies. And we also saw the amendment of the family law back in 1989, and we actually saw the patriarchal family headship system maintained back then, but then the family law largely was amended in a more favorable way towards women. And we actually have joined the CEDAW, and we also have seen the new establishment of a women-related issue dedicated organization within the government, which actually became a really good engine for the gender equality promotion in Korea. So the family laws was amended thanks to such a background. And we were also able to submit the first report to the CEDAW as well. And in 1990s, so we actually see something called the International Human Rights covenants, and this is an important covenant that is covering the human rights. And if you look at the content of the covenants, the women's rights should be treated as the same rights as the others is actually included in the content, and women should be enjoying the same level of rights is also included in the content. And the South Korea and North Korea joined the UN back in 1991 together, and Kim Young-sam government actually inaugurated in 1993, which actually laid the foundation and the social environment for us to pursue the gender equality voices and the policies. And we have seen the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and we also saw the UN World Conference on Human Rights being held. And these are the driving forces that were out there that was actually giving us a positive influence as well. And thanks to that, we also saw the establishment of the relative ministries as well. And if you look at the women's organizations that were built back then, in the 1990s, most of the organizations were built related to the sexual violence or the women's violence. I mean, there is a case where Ms. Kim Bo-nam actually murdered the man who raped her in the past, and such incidents actually gave rise to the women's rights issues. And we also saw the public testimony of Kim Hak-sun, who is the victim of sexual slavery by Japanese military, which actually became the foundation for all these women's rights movements to come to life in the 1990s. And we also made the Korean Council for Women drafted for military sexual slavery by Japan back then as well. So the violence by the nation and violence against women were brought into spotlight based on the efforts made by these organizations. And if you look at the gender equality policy, which is on the right-hand side, based on the amendment that was made earlier, we were able to withdraw the reservation on CEDAW Article 16-1, C, D, and F, because we have made the amendments on the relative domestic law. And when it comes to the sexual slavery by Japanese military, we also saw some new laws that were made to protect the victims. And in the late 1990s, the fourth Women's Conference actually had a big influence on us. So about 100 organizations in Korea came together to form an NGO association, and there were 9 steering committee members running the NGO organization, and 500 Korean women actually participated in Beijing World Conference on Women based on the effort made by that NGO. And the NGO forum preparation meeting was actually held in Manila, and we actually suggested to have the East Asian Women's Forum against that backdrop, and that was held. And during the Kim Dae-jung People's Government period, we actually had the special committee on women's affairs right under the president, and women's policy desks were installed in 6 government ministries as well. But these desks didn't have much legislative power. That is why there was some structural changes that was made afterwards. But then this was a really important achievement that was made in the 1998. And the hotline on equality and the Women's Hotline 1366 and the other efforts were made as part of the gender equality policy as well. And in terms of the women's organizations, we were able to see many of them coming into life in many different, more specific areas. So peace organizations and the political peace organizations, I cannot really name them in detail because there have been so many that were born back then. And we also saw the establishment of Ministry of Gender Equality in 2001. And it has been expanded to Ministry of Gender Equality and Family in 2005. And with such expansion, we were able to see many changes that are happening in society. And if you look at the gender equality policy on the right-hand side, in 2000, we actually saw the quota system installed for women, which allowed for the proportional representation of women, which is up to 30% of National Assembly and Provincial Council. But then the proportional representatives is not taking a huge portion of the government. That is why it doesn't really play a huge role, but then still it was a really milestone change. And in 2005, as you all know, the family hardship system was ruled unconstitutional by the Constitutional Court and was eliminated based on all the efforts made by the relevant organizations. And at the late 2000s, with the inauguration of Lee Myung-bak government, there has been discussions on merging Ministry of Gender Equality into other ministry. But then there have been a lot of movements among women's organizations to stop that, and the petition for the retention of the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family was done. And also, we also saw some celebrity-related issues that are unfavorable towards female celebrities. So we actually made some efforts on that front as well. And gender mainstreaming has been an important agenda here as well. But gender mainstreaming is only a tool. It cannot be the goal itself. So the gender responsive budgeting and the gender related indexes are in fact the tools for us to pursue the gender equality policies. And we also put together some policies related to female migrant workers and migrant women. And in 2010s, we were able to see many gender equality policies coming into being, and many gender-based violence and the crimes were tackled as a really important agenda. And we see a lot of social discussions on it as well. And we actually abolished the offenses subject to complaints in the criminal law. And we also have eliminated the statutes of limitations related to the sexual crimes against the women with disabilities. And we also saw a lot of abolishment of the laws that are impacting women in a negative way. And in the late 2010s, we have seen the legislation allowing women as joint agricultural operator, and there was a move to have at least one woman as part of the board of directors of a large corporation. And you all know that we actually had the nth room case, which actually was a really important and big crime that happened, and such efforts are still continuing to tackle the ramification of such crime. And we do have a lot of systems that are set up to help the victims, but we still have a long way to go. And we have seen the inauguration of Yoon Suk-yeol government last year, and they have the agenda of abolishing the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. This was not done, but then there was a strong backlash that came into the picture because of such changes, and this is going to be an important aspect that we will have to consider when we're thinking about the gender equality policy going forward. So 2 years ago, Sexual Crime Prevention Act came into being, but then it didn't really have a tangible impact. I mean, that kind of complaint was received this morning, based on an email correspondence, but then I cannot really give you the full description of what has happened because of the time constraints. So that is why I had to kind of go through the pages really quickly. So if you look at the drivers of gender equality policy in Korea, I mean, of course, the most important thing would be the active women's movements in Korea. I mean, the self-help efforts made by women actually played the biggest role, I would say. And another important thing is the role of UN Women. And in 1975, which is actually designated as the Women's Year, starting then, we actually were able to get a lot of positive impact from the global changes, global environment. And before the Beijing Convention, we didn't get much of an influence from the outside world. But then after that, we were able to get a lot of positive influence from the international community. And we actually have to see, we actually ratified the CEDAW, and that actually is requiring us to submit the reports to the CEDAW, and that is allowing us to monitor the related activities and making the NGOs to participate in such activities is something that actually played a big role. But then depending on what kind of party is taking the power and depending on what kind of government comes to the administration, we actually see a lot of changes in the gender equality policy. And what we should do is to use such changes to influence the elections, presidential or local, in a positive way. And let me touch upon some of the areas where we can make the biggest improvement because we're lagging behind quite a bit. The first area that we could do better is the women's economic independence. Our women employment rate is less than 60%. And if you look at the gender wage gap, it's actually the worst among the OECD countries. And if you look at the short-time workers, about 70% of them are women. And this is directly linked to the unstable pension and life of women after retirement. And if you look at the equal pay for work of equal value, it's not done in Korea. And we have horizontal and vertical occupational segregation that is happening by gender. So for example, the caregivers for the elderly is mostly women. And if you look at the women who are giving out lunch at the canteen at the school, they are mostly women. So that kind of gender gap should be eradicated, and the Ministry of Employment should be making efforts to reduce that gap. But then this is not exactly done in the right way. If you look deeply into what kind of policies that they are pursuing, many of them is only related to the childbirth or childcare. They are really not looking into the foundational elements of what kind of actions should be taken for us to be able to reduce such big gender gap. So the employment policy is actually built and designed based on the low pay or unpaid work of women at the moment, which should be improved. And the second area that is most behind is the women's equal representation. We only have 19% of the women in the parliament, and that is actually done thanks to the, a quota system. And as Anna mentioned, you actually said that the number is higher than that, 26%-ish. But still, we can say that Korea is lagging behind the international average, and we are not even up to par with the Asian average. So among 17 head of the organizations, there is no women head of the organization for the provincial government. And if you look at the administrative branch and the judicial branch, we still see a long way to go. So the limited representation of women in such environment is actually bad for women, and this is because men do not want to give up on their privilege that they already own, and we are quite skeptical of how this will change without much effort. And we also have other areas where we need further improvements. When it comes to violence, of course, we have made a lot of progress so far, but still we have a long way to go. And sexual and reproductive health should be taken care of with women in mind. We don't see much health-related initiatives that are in place that is dedicated to women. And in the low fertility era, like now, we will need to think deeply about what women, policies should be pursued. But then those policies are not exactly made in the right way, I think. So these kind of considerations should be deeply considered by the policymaker that is largely men. And the abortion crime is actually considered ruled unconstitutional in Korea, but then we do not have any law to replace the existing law at the moment. And when it comes to the minority groups, we have the elderly women, and we have the women with disabilities and migrant women and sexual minorities that are not protected fully by the legal system. And gender mainstreaming, we are doing making a lot of efforts in that regard, but then if you look deeply into what is being done, many of them are superficial, and we were not able to change the foundation yet. So we still have a lot of challenges. I know that I am over my time limit, but then this is the last slide. Apologies. So whenever the administration changes, there can be regression in the gender equality policy, and the women organizations should be actually putting all their effort to, stop that from happening. I mean, this is the current situation, and we will need to change that. And we still have a really strong hold of patriarchy in Korea, and a lot of the policies are based upon the premise that women are going to be working in an unpaid and low-paying work. And the welfare system is built based on that premise as well. And there are new challenges out there, including the climate change and the digital transformation and so forth. But then there hasn't been enough of the discussion on women's issues when it comes to the new challenges. So these are the challenges that are at hand, and we will need to make a lot of efforts. I'm sorry for overrunning my time. Once again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shin, Chairperson Shin, for your wonderful keynote speech. And she has touched upon the history of the gender equality policies in Korea. Let us wrap up the first session. But actually, we would like to introduce one more person to you, Mr. Kim Hyun-chan, Director of the Youth Policy in Korea. Thank you so much for coming.
Okay. We would like to resume the international conference in commemoration of the 40th anniversary of the KWDI. We'll be having a panel discussion under the theme, How will Korea's gender equality policy respond in the transition era? Thank you, and apologies. The roundtable will be moderated by President Moon Yu-kyung of the KWDI. Hello? I am holding this microphone for the second time. In this roundtable, we will be having a roundtable discussions on how we will be able to grow even more as a global think tank based on the research achievements so far. And based on the research achievements of the KWDI, we will be talking about how will Korea's gender equality policy will need to respond in the transition era. And we will have 10 minutes for each panelist. The first speaker, the first panel, would be Kang Yu-soo, President of the Korean Association of Women's Studies. I don't think I will have to introduce her to you so much because you will all know her. So she is a professor at the university, and the women's culture and women's movements are her key areas of concern. Please give her a big round of applause.
안녕하십니까.
Good afternoon. I'm Kang Yi-soo, President of Korean Association of Women's Studies. First of all, let me congratulate you on the 40th anniversary. Actually, this year and next year, 2024, are very important years for Korean women's studies and feminism and the women's policy research. For the first time in Asia, actually, a master's course was introduced in Ewha Women's University, and then that was around like 40 years ago. And then this year marks the 40th anniversary of the KWDI, and also next year marks the 40th anniversary of our association, Korean Association of Women's Studies. So actually, this year and next year marks a lot. And then 40, the year 40 actually means a lot to Koreans because it's actually a year when you are considered to be unswayed by any external factors or conflict. So actually, I would like to believe that feminism and women's studies here in Korea are now at a time as it reached its 40th anniversary where we shouldn't be swayed by any other external factors. So we have a long way to go, but we still have achieved a lot so far for the last 4 decades. Actually, I prepared this presentation, but I have this time limitations. So we actually heard these very wonderful keynote speeches in the first session. So we have touched upon what happened for the last 40 years. And also what's happening globally. And we have listened from them what happened for the last 40 years. So I would like to actually summarize my presentation because I did prepare similar contents in my presentation, but then I would like to shorten it. So where should we have our focus on? That would be the key content of my presentation. For the last 4 decades, lots of changes happened. So as a discussant panelist today, I would like to have my focus on the growth of women. For the last 4 decades, when it comes to education, we saw lots of growth. In particular in Korea, actually, we saw the largest growth or development when it comes to women's education. So what's going on now is actually different from a long time ago. Women here in Korea and everywhere actually in Korea in particular are equipped with the skill set or they're competent to go anywhere and use their skills. When we look at the college entrance rates of Korea, women actually are showing larger figures. So it's not that women are not getting adequate education. It's just that they actually are advancing into lots of areas of Korea with their competence. But then, are we utilizing them right? That is a question. Because gender inequality persists here in many areas of our society and economy. And then, based on such environments and under such circumstances, we actually have come up with many policy proposals, but we need much more to do. Actually, KWDI is touching upon every area when it comes to gender equality. So they're doing great when it comes to policy proposals. But actually, today we would like to look further into the future. So Korean women are competent and they have the skills and education, but then how are we going to help them utilize these skill sets, and how can we help them advance into all these areas of society? Men and women have seen lots of development in this society. So when we look at men and women in the society, they have similar economic perspective, or actually they have the similar life prospect. When they look at their life, they expect similar things in their lives. They want to work, they want to enjoy the balance between work and life. But then still, when it comes to the life prospect of women, certain things are lacking. And I would like to propose certain key points. Now, we have to go further beyond macroeconomic factors. Because KWDI has this enough data set to analyze what's happening macroeconomically, we need to do something further. We need more details, more detailed data that can show what's happening in every aspect when it comes to gender equality. Korea actually has the largest income gap. And then for the last 3 years, we've been discussing it, how serious it is. And also 53% of female economic participation. That figure is also very serious. So we need to do much more when it comes to women's participation in economy. And these indices and indicators need to be put in place. The right ones need to be utilized when we come up with policy proposals here at the Institute. And that's going to help improve the situation much better here. My second proposal is the policy around low birth rates. Well, lots of concerns and consideration are being given to these policies that cover or address low birth rates. But the situation is that the low birth rates issue is very serious. But then when we carry out proposals regarding this, we know that just policy itself, not taking into account gender equality, is not enough. So it's about choices that women make, whether they would get married or give birth. When we look at men in their 30s, the marriage is actually a difficult option for them. So people in their 30s just simply are not getting married, and that's resulting in low birth rates. Why are they not getting married? Why are they not giving birth to their children? Well, because marriage and childbirth are no longer option for them. That's the situation or the environment they are suffering these days. So all these policies regarding low birth rates have to go together with gender equality, and then gender equality policies actually have to be at the center of all these policies. What kind of directions men and women are pursuing when it comes to these policies? We have to be more systematic when addressing this issue. And also, we would like to ask for more detailed proposals from the KWDI. Also, the last point I would like to propose is these research efforts from regional level. The population crisis in Korea is very serious. Women in regional areas, not the metropolitan area, are suffering even further because they do not have the right system in place. And also these local governments of regional areas in Korea, they're up to these gender equality policies, and they tend to change a lot of their policies, and that's actually not helping anything. I had this experience of studying at these local levels, and I saw lots of issues regarding gender equality policies of these local governments, and we need to pay more attention to it. Actually, I'm running a little longer than the time given to me. Actually, our first keynote speaker, Anna Karin Yatfors, has mentioned this digital gap when it comes to gender equality. From the global perspective, to be legally protected, actually, we need much more things to be done. And if we do not address this digital gender gap, it's going to worsen the situation. That's why we need to pay more attention to addressing digital gender gap. In Korea, we are utilizing technologies right when it comes to digital technologies. We are doing great, but then gender equality is not at the center of policies around digital technologies or development. Digital transformation is happening very fast, and we need to catch up with that. So we don't want women lag behind when it comes to utilizing digital technologies. So I was at KAIST sometime just before, and we had this discussion about technology and gender. And these female scientists are feeling the issues on the ground. We have this M-shaped employment curve when it comes to female employment. So after giving birth to their children, female often use their jobs and then end up in these secondary jobs. So female scientists also are suffering from the same curve, and they have difficulties landing good jobs after they start their family. So we need some right policy to support these women go back into their jobs and field. I would like to share with you lastly that in our society we have achieved a lot, but when it comes to global standards, we still lag behind. And a lot of things need to be done in Korea, and the body that enforce all these policies need to be strengthened. Actually, the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family doesn't have strength enough to pursue all these directions. All these ministries that are centered around men have louder voices. That's the situation here. And the body that enforces gender equality policies need to be strengthened and also has to have more support so that we can create a society where everyone is happier and healthier. Thank you.
강희수 교수님, 감사합니다.
Thank you, Professor Kang. You made about 5 different suggestions. So the indicators that show the inequality should be developed, and the gender equality policy and low birth rate should be connected, and the reduction in the regional communities will need to be addressed, and reducing the gender gap in digital world is another thing, and how we'll be able to support women in all areas. So the 5 different topics were the key topics that you covered.
다음에는 오경은 부산 여성가족
And next, I would like to ask Oh Kyung-eun, Chairperson of the National Women's Policy Network and Director of Busan Women and Family Development Institute. So she has served as many different directors in women's organizations, and I would like you to give her a big round of applause.
죄송하지만 시간이 늦어져서요. 조금
We have this time delays. Could you make your presentation within 8 minutes? Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Oh Kyung-eun. And first of all, I would like to congratulate KWDI on its 40th anniversary. And as head of National Women's Policy Network, I am very honored to be here to share with you these insights. And all these presentations and speeches were so great. And I actually would like to add a little bit to them. And also, as a head of the network, the Women's Policy Network, I would like to make some proposals. When it comes to gender equality, we have lots of challenges, but these challenges actually more recently have focused on these Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. Starting in 1988, the ministry has achieved a lot. And then without the ministry, we wouldn't have seen that much achievement or progress. But then we see lots of challenges focusing on this ministry. And then we sometimes tend to see this depreciation despite all these achievements the ministry has made. And sometimes these are based on the conflicts between men and women. And I would like to express my regret regarding that. When we look at some analysis, we still have a long way to go when it comes to gender equality, as we have seen from previous presentations. We've seen achievements, but still we have a long way to go. But we have this wheel at every level, individual, ministerial, and the civil society level, and everywhere we see this wheel, and we have to come together, join forces, and also come up with negotiations and agreements when it comes to carrying out these policies. So communication was one of these indicators that we saw some lagging behind. Gender-based violence was also an area that we saw some seriousness and where we needed more progress. As we have seen from previous presentations, among OECD countries, Korea is suffering from one of the largest levels of gender income gap. 12% is like the average, but then Korea, we have over 30% of this gap. And that just tells us how much more we need to do. Going forward, what should we do to come up with a society more equal? So there are factors or indicators telling us that gender inequality exists and persists. We do need our focus on these policies addressing gender inequality, women, care, employment, jobs, violence, human rights. All these sectors need more improvements. When we look at the global trend, enforcement of such about 194 countries around the world have this system to enforce related proposals. In Korea, we do have this enforcement body as well, the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, but these movements to abolish this ministry actually is something that's going against such global trend. Regarding gender and gender equality, other countries have their own bodies, but then the global trend is that they have this name that doesn't directly use women in these body in their names, but using gender equality more often. Actually, I would like to highlight the importance of subnational level movements or the regional level movements, because so far all these proposals have been had more focus on top-down methods, or these enforcement of policies have been very much focused on the metropolitan area. In Gyeonggi province, for example, all the government bodies in that region had these gender equality body under them. And then that was a good example of how we can introduce gender equality in all these governmental or local governmental level. And we need some kind of network that can connect all these efforts. Well, my network, or the Busan Women and Family Development Institute, is also a good example of how regional institutes are doing a lot to achieve gender equality. We have over 16 such institutes, policy research institutes around the world, and then we are continuing our dialogues and connections, but still there needs to be more efforts to connect all of them. There have been lots of movements to shut down certain institutes or merge them, especially under this administration. Many institutes in Daegu, also in Busan, were merged or sometimes shut down. And well, can they play their role after they were merged? So we need to pay closer attention to what's going on now. These Happiness Promotion Center is right there. And under that body, we have many institutes. The Family and Gender Equality Center is a new name for these institutes in these regions, for example, Ulsan and Busan. So can they work more effectively under this new system as they go through these restructuring? So we need to raise our voice when it comes to restructuring of these sort, because we have to be able to more effectively communicate among us, and definitely have to strengthen the network. And also we have to go together with the government and ministerial bodies. Now, lastly, I would like to propose certain things to KWDI. For the last 40 years, you have been doing so great, and that's been the base of all the gender equality policies in Korea. And every time the administration changes, the institute and ministry have seen lots of difficulties too, but let's not get swayed. Even though these administration changes and all these different situations happen, gender equality isn't only about women, it's about everyone, of course, including men. And all these stakeholders need to come together. And I would like to ask for that from KWDI. Thank you. Thank you, Chairperson Kang Eun-oh.
Ms. Gu Myung-suk has been the chairperson of Global Women's Network since 2009, and she is also the conciliator of Seoul Family Court, and she was also a former chairperson of Korea Institute for Gender Equality Education. Please give her a big round of applause. Nice to meet you. I am Gu Myung-suk. So, first off, the KWDI has been the forefront of the gender equality policy as a think tank in that regard for the past 40 years, and I want to thank you for all your hard work for the 4 decades. Looking back at 40 years, we want to think about what new ways we will need to think about for the gender equality policy. That is the theme of today's session. So, in fact, the keynote presenter, Ms. Shin, actually took stock of the 40 years, and she also touched upon the solutions as well. I mean, there are areas that require continuous improvement, and She also talked about the challenges related to gender equality policies as well, when we were able to have really comprehensive understanding on all those fronts, thanks to you. And as we developed a lot of policies, we actually came to today. We are standing here today. But what we need to think about is how much of a achievements or the actual changes actually took place. And this is a really challenging question. So having a tangible difference is something that is really difficult to achieve. That's what I actually felt listening to the presentations and discussions today. So even if you have good policy in place, for those policies to result into a tangible changes is another story. And only when you have the tangible changes, you'll be able to say that we have made the society happier and more just. So this actually served as an opportunity for me to think in that regard. So the KWDI actually gave us 3 different questions to answer. And actually, I took some time to think deeply about all 3. I might not be able to give you a really in-depth answer here, but I have given some time there, so I would be happy to share some of my insight with you today based on my experiences. So as we pursue gender equality policy, what is the major challenge? I mean, that is the first question that I was asked. On that note, I think that the political and economic gender equality will need to be continuously pursued for us to achieve a more equal world. And there should be no unequal treatment of the women who are in the workforce. We will need to support them fully. Gender equality should be the basis, I think. So, of course, comprehensive gender equality should be our focus. But then, what is going to be the building block of that gender equality is the equality between male and female. And that equality between men and female, male and female, is something that is felt to everyone on a day-to-day basis. So if we don't have that in place, and if we only talk about the superficial topics instead of fixing that, we will not be able to have the tangible results. So the women leaders are out there. And there are also people who are researching this field as well, but they sometimes have a difficulty in having the equal family setting. They actually complain about that often too. So if you cannot handle such inequality or injustice at home, if you cannot resolve that on your own, and if you go outside and make arguments for gender equality, there is in fact certain gap. So this is a really challenging situation. I mean, I'm sure that you're feeling that in your daily life too. So what we should do is to think really deeply about what we actually should do in our daily life. If we make difference in our daily life, then it's going to mean something. I want you to keep that in mind. There are households where the parents are not equal, and the children who are living in that household actually learn about those gender biases at home, and it is actually very difficult for these children to work or act in a gender equal way when they become adults. I mean, they will be learning about the lessons at school and other areas, but then they cannot really digest it from the bottom of their heart. And we actually see this very often in men. So what is very important here is that the gender equality policy should always engage men. I mean, if women are the only ones who are advocating for women's policies, if the men do not come join, and if the men do not get persuaded completely, then the actual tangible gender equality cannot be achieved. So this may sound very outdated or cliche, but I want to highlight the importance of education. And it's not just about school education. The education at home is something that is very important, so that will need to be the focus of many policy making as well. I mean, there can be some problems that are closer to the heart that may not be completely accessible by the policy or laws only. I mean, this is something that I always feel in my daily life. So that is why I am sharing this thoughts with you today. We want to create a fair world without discrimination, and for us to achieve that future, we need to really deeply think about the issues that are raised by the younger MZ generation. We need to listen to them closely and reflect their views on the policy making. We will need to close the culture gap between the older generation and the younger generation. We are seeing a huge gap between the two, so we will need to think about how to reduce that gap. So they want to live in a fair world, in a happy manner, and we will need to create measures to make that happen. We will need to bring in the policies and systems that will help them to make that happen. And I was also given a question on more specific policies or more specific improvement areas, and this will be overlapping with what all the other speakers have said, but then I want to highlight the importance of care work. There should not be any wage gap when it comes to care work. I mean, and also the parental leave for the fathers should be strengthened. A lot of cooperation and participation of men should be there. And for this to happen, we need to have better care facilities, care infrastructure, and care workers to support the families. And I'm very interested in the cultural entertainment industry, so I also came to think that even in the cultural and entertainment industry, the gender equality policies should be made and be implemented. I mean, there is a lot of research that is ongoing, and I want more policies in that regard. I want to allow women to have more access to the cultural entertainment, and we want to I would like to see more opportunities given to women in that field as well. And I think that can be backed by policy. We will need to continuously make efforts, of course. More humane, more virtuous, and more inclusive society will need to be created. And by doing so, we will be able to help men and women to live in a happier mode. And this is for the direction that we should take. We still have a long way to go, yes, but if you think about what has been achieved so far, I think we will be able to achieve so much in the coming years. And lastly, I want to touch upon the environmental changes and changes in times. Well, nowadays we are living in a world where the technology is crucial part of our environment, so we will need to develop policies considering such aspects. So this is an era where artificial intelligence is emerging. So we will need to think about ways to encourage women to join the workforce in an era when the artificial intelligence is in use. So this is an environment where digital convergence is happening. So we will need to continue on with our efforts on developing policies and support around what kind of content can be created in that regard. And gender responsive content development is something that we should do. And digitally enabled content development is something that we will need to do as well. And we will also need to think about developing many different content that is based on the gender equality sensitivity. I'm sure that many of you are researching those fields at the moment, but I think I want to highlight the importance of such aspects. Once again, I want to highlight that the virtues and the hearts of individuals matter. That will need to go hand in hand with the changes in the system and policies. Only when we have both, we will be able to have a wholesome gender equal world. So I want to highlight once again the importance of education so that we will have a set of people who are virtuous minded. So what kind of education do we need to give to the people so that the people will be thinking in a different way? How can we help them to naturally think in a gender equal way? We will need to keep those questions in mind when we develop policies and systems. So we are seeing more multicultural society unfolding in Korea. So we will need to think about the characteristics of Korean culture, and we will need to incorporate that into our policy making so we'll be able to have better values in that regard as well. So that'll be it for my presentation, and I want to thank the KWDI for their efforts and hard work. Let's make endeavor together so that we will be able to have our future generations live in a happier society. And I hope to have Korea prosper based on such happier society. I hope the KWDI to do a good job in that regard. Thank you. I didn't give you the time limit, so it seems like you are in fact running over time. I think you are not checking the time there. Maybe you could have stopped me in between. No, it's okay. I mean, I absolutely enjoyed your presentation. Next, moving on to the next panelist, who is Kim Min-moon-jung, the co-representative of the Korea Women's Association United.
Good afternoon. I'm Kim Min-moon-jung, co-representative of the Korea Women's Associations United. So, do I have 6 minutes now? I guess we have this time constraint, so I'll try to make it short. Now we are at this era of great transformation. Actually, the very theme of the roundtable discussion is how will Korea's gender equality policy respond in the transition era? So actually, I was given these questions as well. I would like to answer them. So we call it era of transformation. We talk about transformation everywhere. In particular, in Korea, women's studies and women's movements have these agenda at heart as well. So what should we do as those in the area to respond to these transformation and transition? So what's the status of today? Where do we stand when it comes to gender equality, and what should we do to improve the situation? Now it's all about how. It's always very difficult to answer that. So we are living in the transition era. Korea Women's Association United always try to see further into the future. It's always good to have a long-term prospect, but I cannot say that my associations United actually has that much insight. So every time the administration changes or there are major elections, so all these different kind of proposals are needed. And then, so by decade or by 2 decades, we try to come up with new policies or new ways to improve gender equality, and also connect all these different institutes or gender equality bodies together to act together. So we had these 2020 general election, and then that's when we actually came up with an assessment on these gender equality policies until then. So all these proposals back then were more focused on addressing the current situations, not really about looking into the future. So that's why we assessed that we need to move into these society based on new gender relations. It means that we need to have a total reconstruction or a restructuring of the system. And that's why we need to strengthen the control tower of gender equality policies, Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. And that's when the 2020 is also a year that everyone in Korea was faced with this pandemic. And during the pandemic, we had more difficulties, in particular around caregiving. All the systems we had in place until then were all shaken because of this pandemic. All these women who had difficulty juggling between work and caregiving went through serious impact of this pandemic. And then that's when we felt the need for care-centered society. So caregiving until now has often about this caregiving, care for children or the elderly, but then the concept of care itself has to be more expanded to include welfare, Medicare, or education. And that's why Korea Women's Associations United would like to put forth this new paradigm of care-centered society. And we need to put caregiving or care at the center of society and economy, because it's something very important, and that's what everybody needs in their life. And gender equality policies to pursue these new restructuring centered around gender equality and care need to be in place. Well, something embarrassing happened very recently, because the new administration, actually the presidential candidate, came up with this, actually pledged to abolish the ministry, the control tower of the gender equality policies. They appointed this minister who agreed to all these abolishment movements, and also among the 110 agenda of the new administration, actually, despite all that, didn't include this abolition of ministerial pledge. Well, their efforts to abolish the ministry actually wasn't realized, and they decided that they will retain the ministry. So there was this conflict, and we've seen some regression. Actually, all these efforts by related bodies were reversed during this time. In many areas of the government agenda, we saw efforts to make women invisible. And that's why we actually felt the actual need to have a control tower at all these. Because we need, at the center of all these efforts, a body to enforce all these proposals. And also there was this process regarding patriarchal family headship system. When this system was abolished, there were lots of actors who came together. And when it came to the abolition of abortion crime, also it was an example of when all these women and all these actors and players came together to raise their voice. To give you more details about what happened back then, these abortion crime was ruled unconstitutional, and then sometimes this constitution or all this judicial system itself can be at the center of this parity. KWDI has conducted lots of research and came up with proposals that showed how some of these judicial systems can be very unconstitutional and how we should reorganize all the systems to address gender inequalities. We also need to go together with the global community, let them know where Korea stands, and also share some practices. And also, we've seen some good interventions made by international community. When there was this I would like to tell you one example where Ministry of Gender Equality and Family did a very great job in promoting gender equality. The ministry filed this statement that filed a statement to the Constitutional Court that abortion crime is unconstitutional, and it played a key role in making that happen. So all these efforts by ministry and the institute played a very important role in improving the situations here. That's why I would like to tell you that the retention or existence of the ministry is important. We're proceeding, going forward, and sometimes
So we are at a stage where the dignity of these people are ignored. So it's not just about the choice of a term. We should not be thinking about that from that aspect only. We will need to think about it in a wider spectrum. And at a venue where we talk about this issue at a global scale, I mean, we see anti-feminists that are coming into groups, they're forming groups and putting in the influence, and we are seeing such backlash that is happening quite recently. And based on what we have monitored recently, such movements are observed. So this is an area where we need to join hands with the international civil society to, address the backlash in a more wise manner, and we will need to address them in a stronger manner so that we'll be able to achieve the gender equal society in the end. And lastly, I actually have an ask for the KWDI. When we talk about whether to keep the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, we're able to see that the gender equality in the regions, the remote areas of the country, are receding so significantly, and we do have high likelihood of many support that is given to these remote regions being reduced. So that is why I want the KWDI to actually look at those remote areas of Korea so that we can continue to have support for those areas, for those regions as well. So I hope you to focus your research on those fronts as well. I'm sorry once again for overrunning my time. Thank you for your insight. And we have the last panelist, Managing Director at GM Korea. We have Yoon Myung-ok, and she served in many different companies such as GM Women, GM, GE Healthcare, and Green Cross. And I would like to give her a big round of applause. Nice to meet you. I am the last panelist sitting here sharing my input. I am slightly different from the earlier speakers because of my experiences. So I want to first of all congratulate the KWDI on the 40th anniversary, and I also would like to thank everyone who put together this event, and thank you for inviting me to this meaningful occasion. I want to start by telling you my story. So you have worked tirelessly, policy-wise, system-wise, to enhance the gender equality in Korea, and I am in fact the result of all your efforts. So I actually started working back in 1997, and you will all remember this. Back then, back in 1997, Korean corporate culture was very hostile against women. It was also very patriarchal. It was very difficult. For me, I was discriminated against, I was harassed, and I actually had a lot of experiences based on sexual bias as well in my first job. So I have learned theories at school, and I have taken courses at school, and they were actually telling me that you can do a lot of things in the society, but then when I actually entered the corporate world, the roles that I can play was limited just because I was a woman. And that was when I decided that I will actually play a key role in opening up the windows for more women in the society. I will do my best to do my work right, and I will be the engine for my juniors to come to light. And I actually canceled like 5 meetings to come here. And because I actually felt a need and responsibility to enhance gender equality in Korea. And the biggest challenge that I experienced in my work is in fact that I didn't really have any female boss to go to share my stories and to get their feedback. I didn't really have anywhere to depend on. So I thought that we need a female role model, and I thought that I should actually be that role model for my juniors. And that was actually the lesson that I got from my first job. And I actually got married afterwards, and I'm raising 2 children. And I am, in fact, someone who actually experienced a lot of what you have been talking about so far, work-life balance and care for children. I experienced it firsthand, and I was able to, come up the corporate ladder thanks to all the sacrifices in my family. And I actually kept thinking, I am raising my children, I am doing my work, and why do I have to be the only one who is juggling and struggling around and running around trying to juggle all these different roles? Shouldn't there be national government support? Shouldn't there be a certain guarantee of the minimum quality of life? Why should that be all dependent on the individual's capabilities? If I look around, I was able to see every female co-workers that I work with are doing the same. That is why I thought that delivering my stories to the more public spectrum or this public venue will be more important. That is why I'm here. I can see that you have been making a lot of efforts in that regard, and I hope you to continue on with such efforts going forward. So I started working in 1997, and I was working in 2000s and all the way to 2010s, and then I actually reached the leadership role, thankfully and luckily. And now that I have taken the leadership role, I am seeing a different picture. So now we will need to make more efforts to bring more women into the leadership roles, and we will need to do more work to nurture more female workers so that they will be coming to the leadership roles as well. That requires my job, that requires the company's job, but the business culture or the corporate culture is in fact influenced by the culture of the country that is in and the world that it is in. So the perspective of the people who are living in the society is actually influencing the corporate culture to change. So we do have a lot of cultural changes happening in the business, but then we will have to look at it in a reverse order. If the changes in the company are, infused into the society, then it can actually create more opportunities for the corporate world as well. So it's going to be a virtual circle in the end. And I am working in I'm working in General Motors, and this is an American company, and there have been a lot of experiences that was experienced by the company. So I would like to share with you what GM has experienced so far, and I think sharing this kind of information will help you to reflect that into policymaking and research. So General Motors is an American automaker, and the group's chairwoman is in place. Her name is Neribara. It's been about a decade since she took office. And that is why the company has high expectations for the female leaders. And it is also putting in place a lot of efforts to accept and accommodate female leaders in a very serious way. So the chairwoman has made a pledge a few years back. GM will become the most inclusive company in the world. The pledge was made by the chairwoman. So the chairwoman is the top of the company. So of course the junior members of the company, which is everybody, will need to make efforts in the same direction. So the company has been around for over 130 years, and there have been a lot of experiences and trials and errors that was there. And what we think of as the most important is DEI. As of now, it's diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. So these three words are like the cultural principles that is leading the company. So DE and I are the core principles that are shaping the culture of the company. And with that as a foundation, what we want is to have, better rights and better equality for women. And even within our company, women's rights or the women's equality, if we talk about such topics, not only male workers, but also female workers actually show negative response. They actually say, why should the women given unfair, treatment? Unfairly good treatment. Isn't that reverse discrimination? Why can't men compete in the same condition? Why are women the only ones that get promoted? We do get such challenges in our company. So how we view this or how we approach it is not from that angle. We are not highlighting women there. We are talking about diversity. And diversity doesn't only include gender. Diversity includes intergenerational gap as well. The older generation and the younger generation, the MZ generation, think in a different way. And also the regional diversity. Diversity in ways of thinking, diversity in different social classes, and the diversity in different titles in the company. We do have a lot of different definitions of diversity, but Korea historically has been highlighting oneness, and we actually have been focusing our attention to become more homogeneous. So we are very unfamiliar with this concept of diversity, and many people are struggling to accept that diversity concept. So that is why we are highlighting diversity here, and we're including gender diversity in that spectrum. So recently we have an issue related to misogyny in society as well, which was touched upon by the earlier presenter. And we are actually seeing a lot of dilution of misogyny in our company because we're highlighting diversity so much. And the key theme for today is gender equality, right? And how we look at it is actually equity instead of equality. So have you actually seen this picture before? My employees have seen it so many times. So what is equality and how is it different from equity? So we have been challenged so often. Why are women treated unfairly, unfairly better ways compared to men? We have been asked that question so often, so that is why we're using this picture to explain to them. So equality is giving the same conditions or the same benefits to people regardless of where they are. But then equity is a different concept. Equity considers different conditions and the environments that these individuals are in, and we are giving different level of benefits to them depending on what kind of situations that they're in. We think about the context of why they're there. currently women are minority, so for us to level the playing field, we should actually give them the benefits for the time being. I mean, we can actually build that kind of logic if we actually look at it from the equity perspective. And this is something that we highlight in GM. So what we want is equity. We want to look at the diverse differences of individuals, and we want to acknowledge the potential of individuals, and we want to maximize the potential of individuals in the end. So when we give equity to people, then we can actually have a inclusive society that we want. So in the company, we can actually create some systems and cultures around this kind of philosophy. Instead of just pursuing a quota or some other systems, what we want to make happen is to change the mindset first, because this is about the culture. So we want to, in fact, make sure that the mindset change is leading to the actual tangible changes in the workforce, and that is actually opening up more opportunities for more people in the end. We are focusing on that front at GM. And I actually have one ask to the KWDI. I mean, going forward, I think the companies will need to play a bigger role, because companies these days are dubbed corporate citizens. And in Korea, conglomerates are not only playing the economic roles, they should actually play a larger roles in society from the inclusiveness perspective, diversity perspective. If they play a larger role in that front, then it's going to be disseminated to the regional society, to the society itself. And that is going to be a more stronger influence than any other. So if the companies play that role, and if we want them to play that role, we should actually show them the North Star, what kind of role model they should follow. And that kind of role model setting can be done and held by the KWDI. I mean, the GM is a best practice in that regard. So I hope that the KWDI will be researching on the best practice of many companies out there, so that that can be disseminated across the society. And I hope that the research institute like KWDI will be playing such role. Because in the end, the company is, of course, pursuing profit. But if you just tell them to do social movements, then they will be not listening, because you do have other organizations that are doing social movements. But then if you tell the companies that what you have to do to increase your profit is to have more diversity, if you actually frame it that way, it's going to be changing their behavior. So if you look at the cases in other countries, the companies that have diversity in their workforce and the companies that doesn't actually have completely big gap in terms of their competitiveness, revenue, efficiency. The companies with more diverse workforce is actually doing a better job. But then in Korea, we do not have that kind of statistics or the data that is supporting this. So I want you to work on that. If you actually make that kind of data or the research results or the findings, and if the Korean companies can look at it, then they will learn and change in a slow manner, but in a very bold manner. So that is one way for us to achieve gender equality in our society. That'll be it for my presentation. Thank you.
Your discussion, it was a panel discussion. We had these 6 panelists giving their opinions.
Thank you, everyone. Today's discussions happen in an intention to develop further into a global think tank going beyond Korea, and we are going to be making utmost efforts to create a gender equal society. And I would like to thank all of the participants for joining us. Thank you so much for your undivided attention throughout the session. This concludes the International Symposium. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Have a safe trip back.